Thank you very much for coming. It's really nice to see everybody here this morning. And thanks for showing up. It's pretty early. So, well, you introduced it very nicely. I came here to sort of review the last 15 years or so of what I've been doing in stop frame animation. And it really has, the landscape of technology has really changed and helped us sort of do that better. So I've got some pictures I brought along with me, and I'm going to talk a little bit about those changes, and then when I'm done, open up to questions, so feel free to ask anything. When I was a child, Lego was my toy of choice. I was obsessed with Legos. My parents were both makers. My dad was an industrial designer, and my mom was a miniaturist. They taught me that if I could visualize something, I could build it. I started building things at a young age, and my dad's workshop down in the basement was my first fabrication shop. So one of my first jobs was after art school. I was a painting major, and I moved to New York City, and I got to work with Michael Curry and Julie Taymor on a couple of projects, one of them being The Lion King. So here's an image of a little model I made for Julie Taymor on a show called Fool's Fire. It's an American Playhouse episode. It was just amazing working with Julie. She was such a creative, powerful force, and she was a really good communicator. So she would describe things in the morning. I would throw stuff together with whatever I could find, me and my cohorts, and then she would come back and review stuff later in the day. One of the things that I did with Michael is we would take these small things and we would blow them up. So these are little maquettes we built that were about 12 inches high, and we would build them much larger for the stage through a couple different processes, which I'll go through. So here's some of the maquettes at the top here, and then how they started to translate into the real thing. Pattern drafting was something that I got into, and that was basically you take the maquette, these are not from The Lion King, but another project I did with Michael, and you would cover it with masking tape. Then you would take the masking tape off, and you would flat pattern it and cut it out of sort of a pliable material and reassemble it. And you could blow that up to any percentage, so you could change it to any scale. It was sort of like Legos, kind of. I was building stuff, but it was a different kind of thinking, and I really enjoyed it. This is just a raw shape. So that was a fun thing we learned to do. So at about that time, I started working with Michael Curry in Oregon. I moved to Oregon, and we got our first computer in the workshop. And that was kind of an amazing thing. For the first time, there was Photoshop in the workshop. And this really, I don't want it to sound like, oh, look how old I am. Look, there was no computers. But this is, it wasn't that long ago. It really wasn't. And I remember sitting down at this interface here, and I was like, oh, I started sliding that hue and saturation bar back and forth. I don't know, does everybody remember doing that for the first time? And it's like, you're like, ooh, oh, it gets all pretty. And then it gets kind of like blue and violet, and then it just goes all hideous, and you're like, oh, it can be used for evil. And I also thought, oh man, I work with these designers who like can't even pick a Pantone chip. Like, what are we gonna do now? Now there's like a million colors. Anyhow, it was. I loved it so much. I started scanning in my sketches, and this is so early, and it's just so hideous. But like that was just a pencil sketch, and I scanned it in, and I painted it in Photoshop, and I painted it with a mouse. I mean, this is click, click, click for every single line. Yeah, it's a funny thing, and I just did it and did it and did it, and it was like my obsession with Legos, continuing to do that. So then I started working at Will Vinton Studios, and we worked on a television show called The PJs, which was just a hell of a lot of fun, an amazing experience. This is when sort of technology started changing a little bit. We were using Photoshop, obviously. We were using it to edit and create artwork, and Wacom Tablets started showing up. So you weren't clicking on a mouse; you were actually drawing with a little pen on a remote platform. And there was also a small CG department, and when I say small, for a pretty large facility, there was 2 or 3 people working in Lightwave. So that was, in my field, that was the first time we actually had this tool to build a 3D object, extend sets digitally, which it was a big deal. And we were much less likely to edit what we were thinking about on a script. Like, if it described something, we could kind of do it now. This was kind of opened up the scale and scope of the show. I remember one of the scripts said, and maybe Paul, you remember this, a rolling ball of death, a motorcycle and a rolling ball of death going down a street. Really ambitious sequence.
Now we got a ball of death happening!
So that's really early days of computer, and that was for television. So it was pretty fun to do that. That was Steve Bailey and his team just doing amazing work. Also, by the way, we shot that on film. So this is also dating myself, but we shot about 42 episodes. That's about the equivalent of about 8 feature films worth of animation. We would shoot it here in Portland. Someone would drive the film up to Seattle to have it processed, and we would watch it the next day in dailies. So everybody held their breaths and hoped that things were right. Doing the PJs led me to working with Tim Burton. I moved to London to art direct The Corpse Bride. It was a big change. I was very excited. I really was in love with stop motion at this point. And at this point, we were fully digital. So this was the first job I worked on that there was no longer the Mitchell cameras that we were shooting on. In fact, the little digital cameras were now placed on these rigs that once held Mitchell. So they were tiny little cameras on these overbuilt rigs, and we would move them through these environments. Now, having the digital thing was huge for us, you can imagine. I mean, we could watch stuff that day. They could take a frame from a set, send it into my cabin next door, and I would work on the image on my computer and send it right back to the stages half an hour later, and then the set dressers would be able to match it, what the set should look like. In very good detail. It was a beautiful communication tool. So here's just a few pictures of what we would do. A model of a church, a foreground element with green screen, another element, and then I would put them together as a digital matte painting. Apparently I wasn't that good at it because they had to redo it all at MPC, but I did give it my go, and it was a good guide for them to do the real things. Also, we had the advantage of having an image up on a screen, and we could place in a piece of artwork or match move 2 camera moves, all there on the set at the same time. It's pretty amazing. We continued doing this work in London on this film until I switched over to, I just wanted to show you this. This is the Photoshop kind of document. This is all cut by hand, paper, and with Scotch tape and glue, just showing sort of the puppet department and how things are put together. That's a scheduling department for a stop motion film. The variables of putting a show like that together are just incomprehensible. The scheduler's always the most nervous looking person. It's basically like a game of 3D chess. I mean, there's so many variables that they have to manage. It's pretty amazing. Here's the lovely Elder Gutnick puppet that I loved so much. So I stayed in London and worked on, I was a production designer on Fantastic Mr. Fox, working with Anderson. It was, again, a wonderful opportunity. I was so happy to work on it. The funny thing about this project was Wes shunned he loved analog, he fell in love with stop motion as traditional techniques, and he really wanted to use no digital tricks. So here we have digital cameras and computers and Maya and every tool at our hand, and he didn't want to use them. So we had to make it look like we didn't use them, and we used digital technology to do that. You know, we could only hide it from him to a point, and he started to get like pretty clever, and he would be like, can I see the actual picture of that stage where you're shooting? That's Mrs. Bean trying to escape from her box. Some great on-set. I love showing the chaos of what a workshop looks like. A little bit of color in there too. Those are Wes's notes on the back wall there, for real. We had just enormous amount of communication with him. He was just a short trip away, but yeah. So that's Mr. Bean at his cider mill. It was a really fun job, really fun working. And it was about this time that I was invited to go to a company that was right down the street from where our workshop was. It was called Metropolitan Works, and it's in East London. And it was basically just opening up, and it was a rapid prototype manufacturing company. We were delighted. We were like, what? What's that? Yeah, okay, we'll go check it out. And we went in and looked around. It was fully up and operational. And at the time, they encouraged artists to come in and just work, and they just gave them the machine. Said, do whatever you want. If you can think it, we can build it. So that was so much fun to go check out. There's what a digital printer looks like. They're not that exciting from the outside, but you know, digital printing, for those who don't know, it's actually a couple of lasers and a suspension powder shooting in and building a 3D object from 3D digital information up as a solid object. It's very strange to see it for the first time, because when it's all done, it just looks like a big block of powder. You pull it out, you wash it off, and there is an object in your hand that is just infinitely complex. They can even make chains that are loose from each other. The links are loose because it's been in a suspended material. And at that time too, I heard that LAIKA in Portland was doing Coraline, and that they were printing the faces. And I thought, God, it just seems so impractical. They have to print every single face, and then of course it wasn't color printing, so it would be all hand painted. Every mark and every paint had, like the freckles on her face had to be in the same place, or you get a chattering in the animation cycle. Tremendous amount of work, but apparently it was working, and I was excited to hear. And they ended up making a lot of faces, so that's a library of faces for Coraline and some of the other characters. So I thought, well, that sounds pretty good, and the opportunity came along to come back to Portland and work on Paranorman. So I came in and production designed that. It was a huge thrill to be back in Portland and to be at LAIKA and to have a wonderful script. And I'm not just saying that. You'll see in August. It's really good. So, you know, Travis Knight, who's a CEO out there, he's so into performance, and he's an animator as well, and he wanted to push this technology even further. So this is about the time we started getting color prints. That changed things quite a bit. So much so that Brian McLean and his 3D rapid prototyping team had to build their own color-specific Pantone kit. So we've now changed our colors that we're using on the shows based on what they can print, which is a funny little turn of events. I love this little display case. This is laser cut, laser etched, printed on the printer, and the box is also laser cut and assembled. So, you know, one of the interesting things about 3D printing, and one of the first things I thought when I started was I wanted to tell my friends, quick, learn Maya, all my model shop friends, you know, this is going to take over. It doesn't really. I mean, in fact, it really makes jobs. I mean, there are, at LAIKA in Rapid Prototype Department, there's 40 model makers, painters, sculptors, animators, and computer whizzers. And on Paranorman itself, we've made over 31,000 faces for this project. And for a few shots, we actually even, not this one, but we printed a practical motion blur. So because it's still cameras, there's no go motion, we printed a sort of blended face. So there's actually some blur in the prints, which is really quite cool. We're also using laser cutting as well. I'll get to that in a second. Here's a wonderful picture of Norman's face coming apart. His face is made of 78 parts that are designed and engineered in the computer and printed in RP. There's so much flexibility and performance you're capable of getting out of that puppet. Even the irises open and close depending on how much light is around them. I mean, not automatically, the animator has to do it. But yeah, so let's see. So yeah, okay, so now here's another nice picture of a Wacom tablet. So this is another advancement. Basically, it's like one of the old tablets, but now we're drawing right onto the computer. That's a flattened Photoshop file of Mr. P's face. Mr. Prendergast, he's a character in the film, and this is what his face ends up looking like printed. So that's what they have to put in, the information that they're putting into the 3D model. We're also using CNC cutters that are digital. They basically are enclosed milling machines for metal, and they take the digital information and can cut these parts. So those are shoes for an animated puppet. That's the actual armature that's inside. It also allows us, once we figure out the maths, to print them, quite a few of them. So those are all done on a CNC cutter. And there's the laser cutter. Doesn't look like much, but those are some pattern pieces cut off of it. And it goes very, very fast, can cut thousands of pieces of very intricate things in all materials, including wood and fabric, paper. And there's also a program from Autodesk called 123D. It's new, it's still proprietary. They own anything that you use, the model itself, but it's like a giant 3D printer. Basically, that's a foam core cut out in layers on a laser cutter, and it's mimicking the sort of back and forth motion of a digital printer. So that's about 5 feet across, so we can print very large things now with a laser cutter. After Paranorman, I got this great opportunity to work with Wes again. I went back to LAIKA House and worked on a spot called Mind of a Child. It was a commercial that he directed along with Mark Gustafson, who is somebody I've worked with on Mr. Fox. It was another lovely job by Wes. It's basically the story of a little boy describing what he thinks is inside a digital phone, a Sony handset, and how it works. So he described it, Wes and his group boarded it, and we all worked together to bring it to life. It was such a high-tech, low-tech kind of job, again, with Wes, although we did a lot more digital trickery on this one. This is one of Wes's drawings. Very, very simple, very sweet, and that's what we did with it. So we tried to keep the sort of the childlike feeling, but bring it to life. So never before, I mean, this is really recent, this is just in the last few months, had I ever worked on a job where I used every single tool that was at my disposal. And it was a really short build. We had 5 weeks to make the commercial. It was very ambitious. We worked day and night. Let's see, so I had been collecting wine packing boxes in my office, strangely enough, for the last year, and so that's what those are there, and I turned them into a factory wall that was evocative of the Pompidou Center in Paris. We rapid prototypes these little robot bodies. So there's a little robot body, and we cast it in silicone. This amazing fabrication team out there was able to create a sort of an army of these robots. This is one of the sets just being mocked up in foam core on set. We started replacing the pieces of foam core, again, really short schedule, and the set pieces in. Here's a picture of a robot hotel that was based on a Japanese hotel that Wes had seen and liked. That's a wide of it. And here's the spot.
Maybe there's 3 little robots, tiny little robots. Their job is to make the phone work, and the leader helps decide what their job is. Like this. Hey, your job is to help the guys. And they have little tiny robot vehicles, except they have to be careful because they're a little small. For a small guy, they're pretty smart. They can predict the future, past, or present. Actually, they just record the stuff on themselves and then go and they just shoot it out. Just like a slingshot. And then they go through the air and bring a song, picture, or video. And they're pretty good. Mostly they like doing it because they never actually saw what it was like in the human life. Just like how we don't know what's inside that device.
So I just want to talk, so that's the last project I worked on. There's, of course, lots of fun stuff coming up. And one of the most recent conversations I had was, again, with Mark Gustafson, someone who I've worked with quite a few times. And he's got a couple of films that he's looking at right now. And he was just describing this, just the most abstract, impossible scenario in a film that he wants to make. And I really thought to myself for the first time, and it was a moment when I was sitting there in my office, that I said to him, don't worry about it. We'll find a way. I mean, with these tools and these new emerging technologies, there's kind of nothing we can't do. And I really meant it, and it's kind of exciting. Thank you. So I think now we have a little question and answer thing, right? So if anybody has any questions about anything, I'll try to answer. That interesting, eh? Yes?
When you worked at Michael Curry and you finally got a computer in, did you find yourself clashing more with the fabric department for costume making?
I'm sorry, what was the last bit?
Did you find yourself clashing more with the fabric department after you got the computer in for pattern making?
Oh, for pattern making. So no, the question is, when we got a computer at Michael Curry's, did it sort of clash, or what happened with pattern making? No, we still made everything by hand, all the patterning. There was no program that helped us advance that in any way. The only thing that it really helped was when we enlarged those patterns initially, when we made small things into large things, you put it on a piece of grid paper, and then you would put a piece of paper on the floor that was sometimes 40 by 40 feet, and you would make a giant grid and you would redraw it by hand. So that's what I did on my hands and knees with a pencil, there's in this grid and this grid. So that, I would send stuff to Oregon Blueprint. I would scan that in and just blow it out, and these big rolls of paper would come, and I would be relieved, so. Yes?
You had a lot of experience without computers. Can you give people who have grown up with computers and have maybe started Photoshop 3.0 advice about being hands-on and then also translating that to the digital world?
Yeah, that's a great point. Elise was saying, for people who have grown up without computers, what advice would you have about building stuff? And of course, I'm a fetishist builder. I love building stuff in all ways. I think there's never going to be, until we get some kind of horrible augmented reality bodysuit kind of thing. Well, maybe that'll be good, I don't know, but for the time being, it's so important, our spatial relationships that we get with our bodies. I mean, right now we're doing previs for our film, and we've got it all built in previs inside a computer. And we also have this archaic hot glue and foam core model over here. And I'm telling you, when the directors come down and the groups come down, they go right to the model. It's like they can take their phone and take pictures and get around it. We can take a building out and put it in a cardboard box. We can mix stuff up in real time. There's a physicality, there's a spatial relationship that people understand. And I just think it's good to use all the tool sets. I think it's really good to to make stuff. That's one of the things a little story I tell, and it's 100% true, that I was cutting on a bandsaw one time in a wood shop, and someone from the computer department was upstairs, walked by, and they were on their way out, and they said, "Couldn't you cut your finger?" Yeah, you can cut it right off. I mean, just right. Doesn't stop at the bone. Yeah. So, but there's something alive about that. You're not going to cut your finger on a computer board, keyboard. I'm not trying to like make a comparison of one's better or worse. They really complement each other well, and I think it's important for everybody to just make stuff physically. Yeah. You first, yeah.
Of all the projects you've worked on, which one was your favorite?
Thanks for asking. Actually, it was Paranorman. There's no question. It was a dream job. I had worked on a couple of films with very, very strong creative leads who had a pre-existing vision. Wes Anderson, Danny Boyle, certainly Tim Burton. They have a look for their films, and I was in service to those looks 100%. So I just did their look. And even though we had a really strong directing team on Paranorman and they knew what they wanted, it was totally open. It also happened to take place in New England, where I grew up, so I was like, I know this place. And I was able to make a world, on my own. And it was such a pleasure, and it's something I had been literally trying and working towards my whole professional career. So that just happened. So it definitely, and I'm immensely proud of it. It turned out the way I wanted it to. It's not compromised in any way. So I'm putting myself on the line here, but I hope you like it. Yeah, I'm sorry, yeah?
Is there a go-to medium you have, medium, when you're conceptualizing? Like when you're just messing around and trying to get out ideas?
There is. It's paper. It's just like, it's brown craft paper, and I'm not kidding. And I have a couple cohort friends that do it too. There's this amazing artist in New York, Mari Tobita, and she makes everything out of paper. She's Japanese, traditionally trained puppet maker. And when we get together, we can build anything. We get some sonotube and some cardboard and some paper and some wheat glue, and we just build the most complex, elaborate models. And it's so quick. You cut it if you don't like it, you tear it off, you burn it, you paint it, you get it wet, you crush it. It happens instantly in your hands, So that's a wonderful thing. And then I would say the other tool is just Photoshop. I think it's one of those tools that everybody's like, Photoshop, like we all know what it is. It's, who doesn't use Photoshop? But it's such a powerful, intuitive tool. So I'll take a picture of that messy, crunched paper thing, and I'll build it into something more sort of presentable and send it around. So, yeah.
With Paranorman opening up pretty soon, there's a lot of different metrics to measure success, from box office revenue, Rotten Tomatoes, critics. What do you use to measure how the movie does?
Bums in the seats. No, just I hope people go see it. It's I think something that's widely appealing to a group is that that's what I liked about working on it. I feel like it's very kid friendly. It's very adult friendly. I enjoyed working on it. I never felt like I was working on some kiddie film. But I also saw when kids came around to see it, they just lit up. So to me, it's a measure of how broad the appeal is of a project like that, because we put a lot of work into it. Selfishly, we want a lot of people to see it. Yeah.
How has your intimate knowledge of the process affected your experience as a viewer?
I'm really critical.
Do you find that you have a hard time separating from thinking constantly about how they have come to create?
Yeah, I do actually. It's unfortunate, but I do. I can't say I don't have that. I sit and watch movies. Then when it all works, it's especially rewarding for me when I see something beautiful and cohesive and well thought out. So I love that, And then when I'm watching a film and it just suddenly jumps the shark or turns into something else, it always really irks me. But it depends. If the story is so amazing and I'm lost in it, you forgive those things or whatever. Yes?
What difficulties have you run into transitioning from building things with your hands into 3D, and how did you overcome them, I guess?
That's a great question. I overcame them through fear and panic, because I was working on a job in London, and someone was like, well, you know Maya, right? And I was like, of course I do. Yes. So I learned on the job at night. Like everybody went home and I was like, bye. And it was a very difficult transition. I was so surprised how difficult those tools are to learn. It's like a foreign language. I mean, to get truly articulate in them, it's just hours and hours and hours. And also, you can solve it 1,000 different ways. So it's really important to like talk to the people around you and hear how they solve things. So yeah, it was challenging. But I think I still go back to it because to me again, I keep going back to Legos, but it's sort of a virtual Lego machine for me now, just being able to build and spin stuff around. And I do it out of pleasure. It's not for anything, and I don't keep the models, but I just play around with shapes. Yes?
Do you feel like the addition of all these new techniques, for instance, the printing of the heads, and you mentioned 31,000 faces, do you feel like just besides just opening possibilities, has it really sped up the process? Or do you feel like that also made it actually longer and more labor intensive because it allows for so many new techniques to be included in the process?
It speeds stuff up a bit, but it's a little of both because any tool you could use and abuse. So if you don't use that tool well, then you're just doing a lot of extra work. But I think in my experience with at least the job I just worked on, it was pretty well figured out at that point. So they weren't just, when we say 31,000 faces, it's not just a number to impress. They're all pretty necessary faces, and they're broken up so you can recombine them and get some huge number of possible iterations. But it's a tool. You can use it to extend or to simplify. It really depends. It did irk me at first. I don't know if anybody here who was a builder had that first. It was like, the printers, they're going to take over. But they didn't, and they're not. They're just helping out a lot.
I have a question about how you catalog and code for all those spaces. Or is it by scene, or is it by emotion, or how do you?
It's, again, by all those things. As a librarian, well, I mean, it's a very complex process of an animator breaking down, the actual speech of the character. That's one of the crazy things is an animator knows on this 5,000th frame that the character's going to be like in this position with that face and that combination. So it's all pre-figured out.
But you might use that face again.
Yeah, they use them over and over. So they're kits, and they just and they also can. If an animator's having a hard time getting a performance, they can actually go to the riggers and the animators and get a face printed that day. So they will integrate that into the shot they're working on. Which that's a stunning advancement in sort of speed and the turnaround. Yes?
What do you think about Portland in general? I mean, you've lived all over the world as far as being a center of creativity and just in general, design, production.
I mean, that's really kind of a big question. I guess I love it here, and I love the community of animators here. I'm not from here, but it now feels like my home. One of the really huge advantages here, if you work in entertainment, is I feel like in cities, to work 80 hours a week, that's nothing. You work 80 hours a week, and then you commute for a few hours, and and here there's a quality of life that I enjoy. I love hiking and biking, and I feel like I eat better. I'm a healthier person. So I think Portland's a great platform for doing this kind of work. And I think it's attracting more and more people from all different disciplines, and it's great. And there's a lot of amazing people here and have been here already that are staying around too. Yes.
I love Wes Anderson wanting to use real artwork in shunning the digital. Was there anything that he asked you to do that sort of made you crazy?
There was a sequence where they're on the motorcycle at the end and they're going through the countryside, and he wanted to do it completely practical. So I built cardboard trees and landscape pieces on moving tracks, and it wasn't quite right. So then I built it again with sort of sticks that we found out in the back of the studio and fake fur, and we did it again, and they didn't like it. And I really, that went on for months and months and months. And in the end, what we really did is we just took a picture of the set and blurred it in Photoshop. You know, but you know what? It's like that's the way he creates. Like you can probably tell I'm a huge fan of working with him, because he's beguiling. I mean, he just has such pure ideas, and he pushes and pushes people, but I think in a constructive way. I think he knows when, at the end, when he's like, all right, don't freak out, let's just do it this way. But I learned a lot in that process, so I think it's a worthy exploration. Did I answer that? No. Yeah? Okay. All right, well, thanks very much for coming, everybody.